Impacts of World War I. From 1914 to 1918. Performance-based objective W.35. Students will be able to synthesize data from multiple sources by recognizing differences among accounts in order to describe the effects of World War I, including Armenian genocide, collapse of major empires, economic issues, environmental changes, loss of human life, movement of populations, spread of disease. Lesson agenda. I do. Introduction. We do. Guided reading. You do. Check for understanding. For this lesson, you will need notebook paper, a pen or pencil, a computer or personal device, headphones. During this lesson you may go at your own pace. Feel free to pause and rewind the video as you need. As we go through the lesson, consider this guiding question. What were the costs of the war? Impacts of World War I. World War I dramatically altered the world. Its consequences were immediate and lasting. Today we will look at the following impacts of World War I. The staggering human and economic costs. Political changes, the collapse of empires and a new map of Europe. And the lost generation and changing views on warfare. The human cost. The First World War resulted in more deaths than any conflict before in recorded history. Deaths were caused directly by the hostilities, but also indirectly from diseases like Spanish flu. There were also nearly as many civilian deaths as there were deaths of combatants. Oftentimes, historians leave out the deaths that occurred in events like the Armenian genocide, the total number of troops mobilized, and battlefield deaths of major combatants. Check for understanding. 1. Between the Allies and the Central Powers, who lost more soldiers? 2. Which single country lost the most soldiers? The Armenian Genocide. The Armenian Genocide was the systematic destruction of the Armenian people and identity in the Ottoman Empire during World War I. It was implemented primarily through the mass murder of over 1 million Armenians during death marches into the isolated Syrian desert, and the forced conversion to Islam of Armenian women and children. The Ottoman government feared that Armenians, in the heart of the Turkish nation, would seek independence. Mass deportation was intended to prevent the possibility of Armenian autonomy or independence. In 1915 and 16, the military forced as many as 1.2 million Armenians into the Syrian desert. They were deprived of food and water, and subjected to robbery, rape, and dehumanization. The Armenian Genocide ended more than 2,000 years of Armenian civilization. To this day, the Turkish government has denied the event and maintains that the deportation of Armenians was a legitimate action. Check for understanding. 3. Should the Armenian Genocide be included in the death toll for World War I? Explain. 4. Why is it important that events like the Armenian Genocide be remembered? The economic costs. Austria-Hungary was the first country to engage in the hostilities of World War I. Despite this, Germany was made to accept full responsibility for the entire war as part of the peace terms. These peace terms, outlined in the Treaty of Versailles of 1919, also stated that Germany would be financially responsible for all the costs incurred during World War I. This financial responsibility placed on Germany was called reparations. The cost of the war by country in US dollars. Vocabulary: indemnity. To indemnify. Hold legal responsible for financial compensation for harm or loss. Caption: perhaps it would have more giddy up if we let it touch earth. Check for understanding. 5. Describe the Treaty of Versailles of 1919. 6. Explain the connection between the chart and the political cartoon. Geopolitical changes. The German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire, and Ottoman Empire all collapsed as a result of World War I. Even before the war, 3/4 of these empires were on the verge of collapse. The nationalistic fervor and the burden of war had led them to collapse. The stresses of war led to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II in Russia as the communists staged a revolution in 1917. In 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany was forced to abdicate and a new German government was created called the Weimar Republic. These multi-ethnic empires experienced nationalistic tensions in the years leading to and during World War I. In Russia and Austria-Hungary, less than half of the population was ethnically Russian or Austrian. As boundaries were redrawn in the Treaty of Versailles, the principle of self-determination was used to create smaller countries for large ethnic minorities. These new countries included Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and others. Europe, before and after World War I. Check for understanding. 7. What problems did some of the large empires of Europe face before the war? 8. List 5 examples of changes in the borders on the maps. The lost generation. After the war, the West experienced a collective national trauma. The optimism of 1900 was gone, and those who survived the conflict became known as the lost generation because they would never fully recover from the horrors and suffering. A United Kingdom census in 1921 showed that there were nearly 2 million more women of marriageable age than men. By 1931, 50% of those women were still single, and 35% would never bear children. Social trauma. This social trauma manifests in different ways. Some people became revolted by nationalism, a cause of the conflict. Pacifism, a belief in nonviolence, became increasingly popular. Others felt the opposite, believing that a strong military was the only thing that could protect them from the chaotic and inhumane world. Several countries saw the collapse of capitalism and imperialism, while communist and socialist movements grew in strength. Attitudes toward warfare. The threat of modern warfare was another reality that was recognized after the war. In countries like Britain, where for centuries, civilians had no reason to fear invasion, new fears were excited. Poison gas and the aerial bombing of civilians were new developments during the First World War. The threat of civilian bombardment by enemy aircraft could occur in any future conflict. This feeling of danger might explain why the Allies favored disarmament of the Central Powers following the war. Check for understanding. 9. Why were they called the Lost Generation? 10. What did people fear even after the end of the war? Lesson review. Answer the prompt below in complete sentences. What were the costs of the war? Lesson finished. Make sure your name, date, and class period are on the top right-hand corner of your paper. Turn your assignment into your class tray.